Good afternoon, everyone. There are many definitions for what constitutes sexual harassment. In today's video, we will be using the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's definition for sexual harassment, which is unwelcome or unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature in the workplace or learning environment. I would like to suggest that this definition, which is commonly referenced in other kinds of workplace policies as well as educational policies, is a little problematic. Let me explain. First of all, can we agree that while if it occurs in a workplace or learning environment, we can accept that there are exceptionally high levels of duress that may be present. In other scenarios outside of these, there is still a level of duress present, perhaps even more. So I feel that the fact that it is in a workplace or a learning environment is partially correct. In the relationship that we have to society, a person who feels they are harassed by billboards or other things may feel like they are being targeted. They may feel uncomfortable. Like, just as an example, I struggle with self-image issues, and I used to be 300 pounds and lost about 100 pounds as part of a health regimen that my doctor helped me with. But I am very self-conscious about my physical appearance and my body, and when I see superheroes or pictures of unrealistic ideals being presented as normal in society, and I say normal very loosely, but it is obvious that it is being normalized, I feel personally very ugly. I feel like I am comparing myself to them. I feel like I am less. And this makes me really uncomfortable to be in public. It really changes the entire narrative of my existence in that moment. I feel unwelcome. I feel ugly. I feel judged. I feel inferior. I feel all body types are beautiful, and every form of body is okay, absolutely, but it is being normalized and held upon a pedestal in a way that makes me feel uncomfortable. So sexualizing heroic male physiques like in the movies, and I say heroic in quotation marks, does make me uncomfortable. It is sexual, and it makes me uncomfortable, and it makes it difficult for me to participate meaningfully in society, or at least optimally. So I feel the definition workplace or learning environment is a little superfluous, even though there definitely has the potential to be common elements of duress present in the workplace and learning environments. Specifically because in workplaces, people go there for 8 hours every day to earn their bread and butter, and therefore there is a great potential for duress there to be involved in sexual harassment, since the person is unable to give consent. And then we have the learning environment. Learning environments, such as educational facilities in college or universities, are oftentimes part of people's socioeconomic status later in life and affect their trajectories in life. So therefore, because of the gravity of that situation, it really does affect a person's ability to consent. And therefore, I do think that workplaces and learning environments are relevant insofar as they are modal. That means very common in terms of grievances. But I feel that it is still a superfluous statement, except for acknowledging what is normal and where these issues commonly arise in terms of grievances and complaints, despite the fact that they probably, and I can attest to the fact that they occur everywhere. So the second issue that I struggle with in regard to this definition, in accepting it, is I mean, you always have a problem when your definition of a word includes that word, like it says here, the definition of sexual harassment is physical harassment, verbal or physical harassment of a sexual nature. Well, if the definition is the definition, that oftentimes breeds poor clarity and speaks to how much more helpful a definition could be provided in the future. Let's just say that. And then sexual nature. Well, sexual is subjective. And I think that's really important. I think that it's really important to recognize that, because oftentimes the subjectiveness of sexuality is discounted to dismiss people's grievances and their feelings. Like, for example, they might say, oh, well, that wasn't sexual. Like rape, some people would say, is other than sexual. It is about power. So it may be one, it may be the other. The fact that it is sexual needs to be recognized that this is subjective in order for this definition to remain consistent. And I feel that this is more of a social problem. I think we as a society need to respect that sexuality is actually subjective and respect people's subjective interpretations thereof. For example, yes, anatomy pictures of naked men on the wall of a anatomy class may be relevant to the material that is being discussed, but it still may constitute participating to sexual feelings in some people, and therefore still be sexual, whether those feelings are positive or negative. Oftentimes the fact that sexuality is subjective allows us to discount people's experiences, discount their subjective interpretations, and discount their feelings. And I feel that the sexual nature part really needs to be taken with a bit of perspective there, that it is sexual, and that is important. The final part, and really the most important complaint that I have, is the unwanted and unwelcome portion. The reason this is problematic is because, frankly, consent and desire, though optimally overlapped, oftentimes are completely separate. Consider, for example, going to get a root canal or other dental procedure or medical procedure such as surgery. Verily, you probably have little desire for these things. If someone, God forbid that you ever need these things, if someone requires these things, they probably are outside of desiring it, let's say. But they do consent to it, they give volition to it, and therefore I can say that consent and desire are separate things. A person can be drunk, for example, and desire intimacy, but sexual intimacy, but they are in a position that prohibits them from consenting meaningfully. A person may desire many things and yet have yet to give consent for it. Another example is an expensive car or an expensive item of clothing. A person may decide that they want something really badly, but does that entitle the company to take money out of their bank account simply because they want it? Consent and desire are separate things. So frankly, the unwanted or unwelcome element to me seems either incorrect or unnecessary, because the desire thereof is largely irrelevant. You can argue to what degree you can consent meaningfully without desire, but I would say that the desire in of itself is insufficient to warrant whether or not something is harassment or not. I think that really the issue, what they mean is consent. I think really the issue is consent. You can take that same definition and make it better by including the definition of harassment as without consent instead of unwanted or unwelcome. Let me explain why. I think you can have instances of sexual harassment in the workplace. Let's take a common scenario. A boss asks an employee for sexual favors. This is a common example used to illustrate sexual harassment, and we understand that this action constitutes sexual harassment because it, one, is sexual and contributes to creating a hostile and toxic work environment. But let's take a look at that. Maybe the person is thrilled. Maybe a person receives a sexual advance from an employer and is thrilled by the advance. Maybe they're happy. Well, in that case, is it sexual harassment? I would say it is still sexual harassment, even according to this definition, because other people are experiencing that sexual harassment, are experiencing that sexual exchange in the workplace, and they may be made uncomfortable by it themselves. So even if the person themselves desires that sexual advance, other people who are witnessing or experiencing it are deriving some kind of peripheral distress or duress associated with that sexual advance, even if it was wanted. But now, let's assume it's just two people, just the boss and just the employee. The fact that the person wants it, does that mean that it is no longer sexual harassment? Well, let me put it to you this way. If the employee does not want it, how would you know? How would you know that the employee is absent and lacking in that desire? The reaction might very well be the same. A boss may proposition an employee for sexual favors, and the employee may readily agree to it and genuinely desire it, and they would act accordingly. They may also be afraid of losing their employment and act the same exact way. So it is impossible for you to tell whether that employee actually wants it or not, actually desires it or not. It is impossible for you to tell without asking. But see, this definition also says that requests for sexual favors in of themselves are sexual harassment. So you cannot ask. You cannot ask for consent. You cannot even ask. So there is no way to know whether or not someone is desiring or undesiring, and there is also no way you can ask to figure that out, because that in of itself constitutes sexual harassment. So it is for this reason that I think the wanted versus unwanted element of the definition is largely irrelevant, or less relevant than the issue of consent. Really, the issue is consent, and what consent says, affirmative consent says in this instance, is that there are significant barriers to consent, such as the fact that the employee is at work and therefore depends upon this for their livelihood. So any other extraneous request associated with sex, for example, will be always taken with duress. Even if that person fails to see it, that duress is still present. That because, for example, what happens if the employee refuses? Well, the employee can fire them. But how is that firing going to look like? Are they going to say, you didn't have sex with me, so therefore I'm firing you? They may. But more likely, they're going to just fire them over some other event that otherwise may have not caused them to be fired. And even if they fire them for reasons that are irrelevant to that, maybe the boss, he's a nice guy, and he knows how to take rejection, and he lets bygones be bygones, and he's okay with being rejected. The employee may still perceive these being fired in the future as somehow being related to their refusal and as some kind of retaliation. They may still feel it that way. And even if the employee feels that they were other than related, other people in the company may witness this and feel that way. So it is for this reason why the issue here is consent as opposed to desire versus undesire. To recap, the reason it is an issue of consent instead of desire is because you may desire things that you do not consent to, and you may consent to things that you do not desire. That's it. Thank you so much for listening today. Have a nice day. Please let me know what you think. Do you think that the definition unwanted versus and the definition of unwanted and welcome are really relevant parts to whether or not there is consent? Let me know what you think. I hope to hear from you.